prayer is quite important. It's mentioned a lot in the Quran. Now, prayer involves calling upon your Lord and then communicating with your Lord. But God did give us a few more components in the Quran for us to uphold to make our prayer a lot more meaningful. And for us to show you those components, we are at the Prophet's Mosque. Now, the first thing is the way that we know that prayer is communicating with God, because God does tell us to not approach your prayer while you're intoxicated until you know what you're saying. So knowing what you're saying is very important when it comes down to prayer. Of course, you can pray at any time and call upon your Lord, but there is a ritual prayer that is very detailed in the Quran.
Now, a quick side note before a certain group of people jump at me. Not every time that you see the word salah in the Quran, it means a ritual prayer. The only time God is discussing a ritual prayer is when you see the word iqama or qumt or yaqum in the verse that are talking about salah. If that word is not present, then it's talking about the divine communication. Whether you're divinely communicating to God, or God is communicating with you, or someone is communicating to someone on behalf of God. But even in the physical ritual that God has outlined in the Quran, if you are not spiritually present, and if you're not doing the spiritual side of salah, then you're just doing physical exercise and you're not actually performing the prayer. And again, not every verse that's talking about salah is talking about the physical ritual prayer. It's only when you see the word iqama present in the verse, or the different forms that iqama can come in, that's when God is discussing the daily physical ritual prayer.
God tells us about the times. He tells us to perform the prayer at the two ends of the day and a portion of the night, or portions of the night. And then God goes into detailing these verses in chapter 17. So one of the ends of the days is from the setting of the sun all the way into the twilight of the night. And then the second part of the day is the Fajr, or the break of dawn, all the way up until to sunrise, or before sunrise in a little bit. So those are the two most important times of prayer. But then there is the verses where God is telling us that the Prophet used to stand half, 2/3, or a third of the night in prayer. This is what we call the middle prayer. You have your dawn prayer, you have your evening prayer, and then you have your middle prayer. Just because evening is technically the first prayer, and then the break of dawn is the second prayer, therefore the night prayer is the middle prayer. The middle prayer, you should try to aim to pray as much as you can, provided that you keep up with what you need to do the next day, but you have to offer at least something. And the more you offer, the more you're capable of finding with your Lord. And now, when it comes down to the prayer, God gives us instructions in regards to washing before the prayer. So in chapter 5, God says that if you are going to stand the prayer, then you are supposed to wash your face and your hands to the elbow. And then you wipe your head and wipe your feet. There are some people that understand this verse as washing your feet. There is ways to prove that it's actually wiping and not washing. It's just so that you don't soil the mosque. And the verse does continue that if you do not find water, for you to do something that is considered as exfoliation, where you find some dirt or some mud or something that is dry, and you wipe your hands with it and you wipe your face with it. So anything that had to do with washing, that's what gets wiped during the exfoliation part. And anything to do with wiping is not mentioned in exfoliation. And you could see that the feet were not mentioned. And therefore, that's why it's wiping. And then after you finish the wash, God tells us to recite the book and to perform the prayer. But there's a similar verse where God tells us to face the direction of the religion, or the direction of the prayer, and to perform the prayer. God clearly tells us in the Quran that the direction of our religion is Masjid al-Haram, or the sacred house, which is found in Mecca. Those are the two first components of the prayer. Another component of the prayer is that you have to prostrate and you have to kneel. Now, when you take all these components and you put them together, you realize there are many ways a person can perform the prayer. So obviously, the sectarians, the Sunnis and the Shias, they have their way of prayer. But they say things that God has not told you to say. So there's many incredible words in the Quran that you can include in your prayer, especially at the end when you want to finish, like the end of chapter 17, or some verses from chapter 3. Or you can even go to chapter 2 and say one of the most famous verses. All of these are for you to glorify and thank your Lord for what He has given you and guided you to. That's why the Quran is there. So there's many times where God says qul, or say in the Quran. You should be actually applying it and saying it, a lot of which can be said in your prayer. The more you practice the Quran, the more you have things to say. For example, God give us good in this world, and in the hereafter, and save us from the punishment of the fire. Or God, put me through a honest entrance and put me through an honest exit and give me from yourself a clear authority. These are things that are said in the Quran as an instruction for you to say, which you can actually say in your prayer. Now, it seems like the prayer is about 30 minutes to 40 minutes, depending where you are in the world, but the more you pray, the better it is. God said that the prayer is a timed procedure for the believers. It's not about the units and what you want to produce as a unit. This is just somebody's application. If you do want to pray with the Sunnis, which there is no harm, there are certain things that you cannot say. So you can't say, Salatu wa salamu alayka ayyuhan nabi. You can't talk directly to the Prophet in your prayer. That is a form of shirk. And then there's other prayers that they say you do not need to really say. You could say what you want at that moment because you are talking to your God. And finally, when they say, Sami Allahu liman hamida, well, that means that God listens or God answers to whoever praises him. But we know that God listens to everything and God answers to whoever he wants. So when they say, Sami Allahu liman hamida, what I reply with, Sami Allahu li kulli shay. God listens or hears everything. There is one more prayer that's mentioned in the Quran. It's called the Day of Congregation. So the day when believers come together and a prayer is called, at that point you should go to your prayer, you should leave your trade, you should leave your entertainment, you should leave things behind that are pertaining to the worldly life, and you should go towards the prayer. It is okay to have a sermon before the prayer itself. The prayer, again, is a reflection of the Quran, and you have to go for the remembrance of God. The sermons, these congregations, whether it's a Friday, whether it's a Saturday, whether it's a Sunday, depending on the community that you follow, it has to be for the remembrance of God. We shouldn't sit there and just talk about Jesus or talk about Muhammad and his friends. We shouldn't sit there and talk about the governments and other worldly lives. We should be focusing on what God has been telling us in the Quran and what we have to do as believers. So one question that I get asked often is like, do you have to pray in Arabic? The answer is no. You have to understand what you're saying. It's something that we mentioned earlier. So it's okay to pray in the language. And if you need help and you read the Quran while you're praying, that's also fine. And you could go find a few different translations so that you could get a better picture of what the Arabic's actually saying. I do recommend for you to actually learn the Arabic if you want to dive deeper into the Quran. But reading a translation is fine because the message of God is international. Everyone and anyone can understand the message of God. And in your prayer, you really have to communicate and build a relationship and build a connection with God. And you can't do it with a language you don't understand.
So just at the end, I do also want to answer some frequently answered questions. Can you pray while you're menstruating? Yes, you can pray while you're menstruating. How do you pray in congregation? So the person who's leading the prayer can issue out commands for you to do the movement that needs to be done at that point. So stand for your Lord, prostrate to your Lord, kneel to your Lord. These are things that can be issued by the leader of the prayer. Is there a spiritual side of salah? Yes, there's a spiritual side of salah which can be done in your mind or out loud when you're communicating to God throughout the day, which you should do often. But it's not what iqamat as-salah means, or the establishment of prayer. Can you shorten your prayers when you're traveling? No, there's no such concept as shortening your prayers when you're traveling, but you can pray while you're on the means of transportation if you're fearing your enemies. But if there is a way for you to perform the prayer during the time it's set, you should perform the prayer. The only time you're supposed to shorten your prayer is if you are in a point of war. Can you have more than 3 prayers? Yes, these are just optional prayers that you have written upon yourself that you want to perform so that you can get closer to God. But you cannot go around and say that they're obligatory. The only obligatory prayers are the ones that are listed in the Quran, which are the 3 that we discussed. And then you have the weekly congregation where you are called towards the prayer. Should a lady cover her hair during the prayer? I believe in public, it does have its benefits so you don't distract the people around you. But when you're alone in your home, I don't think that you need to cover your hair to communicate to your God. When do I have to do a full body cleanse before I perform the prayer? Well, God states in 5:6 that if you touched your women or your spouses, so you engaged in sexual activity, or if you went and defecated in the bathroom, or if you were sick or you were traveling and those concluded, that's when you should have a bath or a shower before performing your prayers. Can you make up prayers? No, you cannot make up prayers. You should seek for forgiveness. God has not addressed anything in regards to missing of prayers, yet He addressed the missing of fasting in the month of Ramadan. So God there, He does tell you that you have to make up for the days that you have missed. Yet He never told you that you could make up for the prayers that you have missed, because you cannot make up those prayers. When the time has passed, you have failed. Can men and women pray next to each other? Yes. But God is aware of what's in your heart. So if you are distracted because there's a beautiful girl next to you or a beautiful man next to you, and you're more concentrated on the person next to you than yourself, then you should rearrange yourself or move away so that you're concentrating on the word of God rather than the person standing next to you. God tells us not to be loud or to be quiet in our prayer and to find the middle path. What I usually do is start with chapter 1 asking for guidance, and then I will read a chapter from the Quran or some verses from the Quran. I will then prostrate, reflect on the verses. I will also exalt my Lord, thank my Lord, praise my Lord, and I will also talk to my Lord in prostration. I will kneel when I need to kneel just to take a quick break and to also exalt my Lord, and then I will carry on prostrating. And then I will repeat this process as long as I need to, and then I will end in a kneeling position saying prayers from the Quran. And if there are people praying with you when the prayer is concluded, you should give them peace.